I'm Bob Schreiber. I'll be your conductor for today's program. Railroads represent an essential part of American history. Now, railroads tamed the frontier and brought every corner of our nation together. They played a leading role in building American commerce and hence America's destiny. In recent years, the growth of interstate highways and air transportation has diminished America's far-flung railroad system to a shadow of its former network. Our Amtrak service is a novelty compared to the once extensive and luxurious passenger service available during the first half of this century. For many, it's hard to comprehend that few members of the younger generation have ever ridden on a train. Despite this decline, few images are as universally romantic and loved as that of a powerful steam locomotive pulling a train. Railroads are a permanent part of our culture and psyche, from the little engine that could, to the shining time station, to the millions of model railroad sets enjoyed by children and adults alike. Americans love trains. Nothing inspires this love more than the magnificent steam locomotive. Although these machines were long ago switched off the main line of railroad history, a growing number of railroad enthusiasts work tirelessly to keep steam railroading alive. Throughout America, dozens of short-line railroads have been rebuilt to preserve America's great railroading heritage, and steam is the locomotive power of choice. Each year, millions of passengers visit these railroads to experience the history, the scenery, and the excitement of railroading. In this series, we will take you to some of the leading historic railroads in America and introduce you to the people and the machines that each year delight so many people. Today we will visit the famous Georgetown Loop narrow gauge railroad in central Colorado. Built in the 1870s to serve the booming mining towns of Georgetown and Silver Plume, the Georgetown Loop was truly one of the engineering marvels of its time. The line rises over 600 feet between the two towns, making several sharp curves, and actually loops back over itself to negotiate the grade in this spectacular valley. The scenery, the engineering, the history are fantastic, but it's the sights and sounds of the steam locomotives that steal the show. Climb on board now for the fun and excitement of America's historic steam railroading. Here now is the Georgetown Loop Railroad.
There is a romance about a steam engine, and a steam engine can be very, very quiet when it is not under steam, and still, because it is an artifact from the past, I think people tend to really enjoy it. But when it comes under steam, then it becomes alive and has a personality, and people can relate to that. And it has sounds that, starting with very young children, they can emulate those sounds and identify with a steam engine.
Operating a short line or a steam tourist line is like nothing in the world. It's got its own sets of rewards. It's got its own sets of challenges. It started out as an adventure. There was a lot of fun in building something, but once it was built and the excitement of things happening in the way of laying track, getting railroad equipment, things like this, then it became a business.
It is a family operation, and that's rather gratifying.
What started out to be what you might have called a love of our lives It's still something we are very fond of, but we're very much in business.
Yeah, Rosa says you're going to be able to do a little bit.
The Colorado State Historical Society owns all of the land and the trackage and the buildings. And all the railroad equipment itself, the locomotives and the cars and that sort of thing, is owned by the Georgetown Loop Railroad. And it is operated under a concessionaire's agreement. The shop building is also owned by the state, and that's included in the agreement is where we can do all our maintenance in the shop. Really, the railroad operates for 3 months during the summer, and the whole rest of the year the railroad keeps a crew of guys here in the shop working on the engines in the cars to keep them operating. Always you've got bearings to rebuild and replace and gears to work on, and of course none of this is stock off-the-shelf items. If we need new parts, they have to be manufactured from scratch. It's definitely more than a job, and when you step back and look at some of the things that we have to do to keep these operating, I think it has to be more than a job, because some of the things, particularly on these locomotives, boiler work and working on this grubby, horrible, greasy mess down here is pretty distasteful work, I would think, in most people's view. And so I think that there has to be something more spurring you on in order to make you want to do this. Not only are steam locomotives a challenge and interesting to work on, but they're a challenge and interesting to operate also, in that everything the operators do is directly translated into how the engine operates. A steam engine is a mechanical wonder. In this day and age, I would say mainly because there are still so many of them still operating, and it's definitely a tribute to the design and the people who built them. The locomotive has a boiler on it that is filled with water, and then at the rear end of the boiler there is a firebox where you can burn whatever you'd like. Locomotives generally burn either coal, wood, or oil. And this generates heat to make steam, and the steam is drawn off and fed into cylinders where it just the pressure of the steam and the expansion quality of the steam is makes a cylinder go back and forth, and through this mechanism it's translated into a motion. Generally, when you're running, you fall pretty much into a routine of operating the brakes and that sort of thing, but at any particular time something unexpected could happen. The whistle is used as a signaling device and as a warning device. It is a warning to people or animals or whatever who are on the track. It also signals to the crew on the train what the engineer intends to do. There's a sense of gratification and pride, and when you go around the corner you look back and you can see the train following you down all full of happy people. It's definitely appealing.
The history of the Georgetown Loop revolves around the spiral that is called the loop, where the train crosses over itself. It was considered quite a engineering marvel as well as a scenic marvel. What made the Georgetown Loop really famous was all the spirals and circles of track, of continuous track, to reach that distance between Georgetown and Silver Plume. The mining camps were in the mountains, and so narrow gauge afforded a much cheaper way of twisting, winding around the hills and climbing a much steeper grade than you could with the old standard gauge. Narrow gauge tracks are only 3 feet apart between the rails compared to standard gauge, which is 4 feet 8.5 inches and was claimed to be the distance between the chariot wheels of the old Roman chariots. The grades between Georgetown and Silver Plume really did make it an engineering marvel. They averaged 3.5 to 4 feet rise per 100 feet. We call that percent grade, 3.5 to 4% grades, which were quite steep and was necessary along with the curves to compress a lot of track, a lot more length of track within the 2-mile air distance between the two towns. You know, we're often asked about our diesel locomotive, and of course this is what killed the steam engine, probably in the late 40s, 50s. The diesel did replace all the steam locomotives, and that's why we're in business today. We have one of them up here, and we love it. It does everything for us.
The diesel locomotive is very handy for us in that you can just climb into it and essentially push a button and start the engines, and it's ready to go in 10 minutes as opposed to 6 hours for the steam engine. What we were doing this morning, this tank car, which was on the side track over there, needed to be brought in to be worked on. So that's what we did. We just went over, picked it up, and put it inside the house here.
The Georgetown Loop is like riding back into history because you do not have railroads that are like this in the States other than having been recreated from a historical railroad. And the locomotives are historical. The information given by the conductors is historical. So it is a step back into history for a brief time.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Georgetown Loop Railroad. For those of you who may be wondering if we're going the wrong way, we really aren't. We back away from the depot for the simple reason that the valley here is just so narrow we can't turn the train around. So on our downhill trip, we put the engine at the rear of the train and he'll pull us down the hill. And at the bottom of the hill, we'll put the engine on the front of the train and he'll pull us back up the valley. The railroad that you're riding on this morning is a reconstructed portion of the old Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railway. You may have noticed those initials, GB and L, on the side of the cars. The first railroad in the area was the Colorado Central Railroad, which began construction in Denver in 1870. It came west following Clear Creek, which is the little stream you see alongside of us here. And it passed through the town of Idaho Springs, finally reaching Georgetown in 1877. About the turn of the century, this became the Colorado and Southern Railway, and on the mountain side of the train here, you'll see a little spur track with a red locomotive. That's engine number 9 of the old Colorado and Southern Railway, one of only 5 narrow-gauge Colorado and Southern engines still in existence. As I mentioned, this was just the stub-in branch line from Denver, but it was a very profitable line back in the early days, bringing miners, their families, and supplies up to the mountain communities and taking the rich ore back to the Denver and Golden area to be processed. This continued until the silver panic of 1893, when the price of silver dropped so low that no one could mine it and make a profit at it. It caused most of the mines here in the upper Clear Creek Valley to close, as this was primarily a silver-producing region. Fortunately for the railroad, this loss of freight revenue was more than offset by a large increase in tourism. As the fame of the Georgetown Loop spread throughout the country and even the world, Thousands of people were coming to ride on what was considered a scenic and engineering marvel of the 19th century. The heavy tourism continued on into the early 1900s. However, as they improved the roads in the area and built more dependable automobiles, folks turned to their own cars for their pleasure and business trips to the mountains instead of riding the train. They did operate 2 or 3 freight trains a week until the late 1930s, but finally in 1938 they did petition the state to abandon the line. The petition was granted, and in 1939 the rails and bridges from Silver Plume to Idaho Springs were taken up and sold for scrap. Our story would have ended there, as it did for many of Colorado's early mountain railroads, except in the 1960s the Highway Department began planning to build the interstate right up the middle of this valley. It would have destroyed our railroad grade and the mining history. The Colorado Historical Society felt that history should be preserved. They were successful in getting the Highway Department to locate the interstate over on the side of Republican Mountain where you see it today. With that done, they began rebuilding the railroad in 1973, starting at Silver Plume, and by 1975 we were able to operate our first trains. We've run every summer since then. In 1984, with a grant from the Betcher Foundation of Denver, they rebuilt the high bridge at the mouth of the canyon, and this is now our 9th season of running over the entirely rebuilt loop. As we round this curve called High Fill, you'll have one of your best scenic views on the line. As soon as you're clear of the trees to the outside of the curve, on the right as you face the locomotive, you'll see the high bridge across the mouth of the canyon, and beyond it a glimpse of Georgetown. On the inside of the curve, for you photographers and rail fans, a nice shot of engine number 14. As we continue around the curve, we're going to be entering a cut in the mountainside. You might notice the rock retaining walls in here. These walls were hand-built in the 1880s when the line was first constructed. You'll notice that they use no mortar, but they did such a fine job of fitting and placing these rocks. They've been there now for over 100 years with very little maintenance, a real tribute to the skill of the workmen of that day. As we come out of the cut, we are going to be stopping now at the Lebanon Mine Tour stop.
One of the nice features we have is probably the Lebanon Silver Mine. And if you are taking the mine tour, you would literally lay over there for about an hour and 20 minutes, and you would be met by guides from the Historical Society and taken on a tour of the outbuildings that are reconstructed, like the mine manager's house, the pest house, the change room. And then you would see the part of the old Lebanon mill that is still undergoing restoration, and you would walk about 800 feet underground, literally under Interstate 70 between Georgetown and Silver Plume. It's kind of a level walk underneath, and it's well lit inside, and the guides take you in and describe the mining of the area.
We're often asked about the equipment we use here on the loop. Our train today is being powered by locomotive number 14. This engine was built back in 1916 by the Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio. It's a rather unusual geared engine called a Shay, S-H-A-Y, after its inventor, Mr. Ephraim Shay. The locomotive has 3 vertical boilers mounted on the right-hand side that power a flexible drive line running the full length of the engine and tender. All the wheels, even those of the tender, are geared off this drive line, which gives the engine tremendous pulling power but very little speed. It burns fuel oil to convert the water in the boiler into steam, and steam is what makes everything work.
Devil's Gate Bridge is still a marvel. At the turn of the century, it was probably called the 8th wonder of the modern world.
The Devil's Gate Bridge, it has a curve, and so as the engines are on the bridge, you are still entering the curve, and you can see the bridge pretty much while you are on it, and really get a feel for what the bridge is all about.
You might take a real good look at the bridge. It is an almost exact replica of the original high bridge. That original bridge was built in the winter of 1883 and 84. It was made of cast and wrought iron pieces resting on cut granite blocks. It cost $250,000, quite a sum of money in those days. In 1939, when the railroad was abandoned, the bridge was cut up for scrap and sold for only $450. This new bridge was built in the summers of 1983, completed in the summer of 1984. This one's made of very modern heavy-duty steel resting on reinforced concrete. It is about 5 times stronger than the original bridge, which is very good because we do have heavier equipment now than they had in the old days. This particular bridge cost $1 million to build, which is a 4 times inflation factor over the original bridge. However, in that same 100-year period, everything else went up more than 4 times, so that's not bad at all. From the track we're on to the track on the top of the bridge will be a rise of 75 feet. When you get up there and look back down, remember it's still only 75 feet. It won't be any higher when you're looking down.
The railroad has 2 terminals. There's the Georgetown boarding area, or we sometimes refer to it as the Devil's Gate boarding area. And then you can also board at the Silver Plume Depot. You can board at either end and get a round trip. In front of the old Georgetown station, we have probably the first love of our life, which is Engine 44. It came from El Salvador and was the first one to operate for us. And it operated many years with minor repairs and has finally just gotten tired. She has a very important part out in front of this building. The old Georgetown station, where we have our offices, our gift shop, our cafe, and exhibit area, started out as the original Colorado and Southern Depot, was built about 1877. The building has always been in this location. The area around it has changed drastically. We have a picture from the 50s where this was sitting out in the middle of a field. Today, it's a very active place again, with the exhibits showing pictures of Georgetown. There's a historical picture of the loop at the end of the building. Then the gift shop is mainly railroad items, but you'll find also Colorado items in the gift shop. We have an area that has a Western artist, Raphael Lillywhite, and then the cafe, which has its own model railroad. So when the real railroad isn't operating, people can come in and enjoy seeing the model railroad as well.
The sound of a steam locomotive working hard is pretty timeless and interesting, as well as being surprisingly loud. It is a very beautiful area, and I definitely enjoy looking out the window, so to speak, and you don't really get tired of watching the things go by.
It's a type of ride that you need to be in the open car, because this is up and down scenery up here, and you need to be looking out and up over your head.
The Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep are interesting in this area because we're right in the zone or the altitude where they like to be. So in a lot of cases along the highway or the railroad, you can come very close and people can see them right up close. Our riders on the train are generally tourists who are in the mountains for a day trip, and find it to be a pleasant way to see the scenery and experience the antique equipment.
Silver Plume is next. Silver Plume. As we arrive at our Silver Plume terminal, you might want to visit the old Silver Plume depot. The office in Silver Plume looks like it did more than 100 years ago. There are train logs on the wall. On the desk is a coffee pot and cup, and of course the telegraph. Looks as if someone just used it yesterday.
Well, my trip was excellent. I just love that big bridge that we just went over. And I hope we come back next time.
What I really liked about this trip was the scenery and the narration and the bridge, looking down over the water. It was really pretty. It was a nice trip.
It's just a great way to spend the day. There's a scenic overlook going eastbound between Silver Plume and Georgetown, and if you stop there, you get to see a live model railroad, because you can see almost the entire railroad. When I stand on that scenic overlook, I probably look at it differently than the regular tourist, because I have 20-some years of memories that crop up.
When husbands and wives work together, so often it's a public perception that the man is doing everything and that the wife is tolerating this, particularly when it involves something to do with railroads. Not the case with us. This has been, from day one, a total partnership of everything we do. There is no boss in the family of this. We're both equally responsible, as well as I hope, sharing in the rewards of it. It's added that pizzazz to our life that we might not have otherwise had we both of us gone down the corporate track.
In looking back over the 20-some years that we have been involved in this, there are many pleasures that I might have. One is that we have created something that people from all over the world can enjoy.
And there's a certain nice feeling, not smugness, just a nice feeling in having been able, rather common people, been able to be a part of rebuilding this part of the heritage and to have it passed on to generations to follow us.
This is Bob Schreiber again. I hope you enjoyed today's program about the Georgetown Loop Railroad. Be sure to watch for future programs on America's historic steam railroads. Welcome to America's historic steam railroads. Over the years, short-line railroads have occasionally received from their passengers, local residents, endearing nicknames. Today, we're going to ride a railroad with a very unusual name, the Skunk Train. Located about 140 miles north of San Francisco, California, on the shores of the Pacific Ocean, is our starting point, Fort Bragg, California. 40 miles of railroad run from the coastal town of Fort Bragg to the inland city of Willits. For over 100 years, rail cars have traveled the scenic Redwood route on the Skunk Line, carrying logs, loggers, freight, and passengers through towering redwoods and mountain meadows, from the sea to Willits and back again. In 1925, the railroad started using their self-powered gas engine rail bus, which prompted people to say, you can smell them before you can see them. I'm Bob Schreiber. Welcome aboard the Skunk Train as we bring back the memories of yesteryear on America's historic steam railroads.
The California Western Railroad operates today both as a freight carrier and a regulated passenger railroad. In fact, it is an intercity passenger railroad by definition.
The railroad operates all year with an all-day 7-hour round trip from Fort Bragg to Willits and 2 half-day rides from March to October.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Fort Bragg was established as a military outpost in the 1850s, principally to protect the indigenous Indians in the area. It was a small encampment, and most of which is lost today. There's one structure left in the center of town that's utilized as a small museum. The railroad was first planned and construction commenced in 1885 as a part of the Union Lumber Company that was being established in Fort Bragg to take advantage of the giant redwood forest that surrounded the area.
When construction of the railroad started, massive amounts of manpower had to be used to cut away parts of the mountains for the track roadbed. Large steam shovels soon had the line open to start hauling the mighty redwoods to the mill in Fort Bragg. The mill was a very busy place during the early part of the 20th century.
We
run freight probably 2 times a week between Fort Bragg and Willits.
The line serves Georgia Pacific Lumber Company and is a vital part of the area's business community. Tourists are drawn from all over the United States to experience the line's historic route and marvel at the well-maintained equipment. Especially its wonderful Baldwin steam locomotive.
'45 is a Mikado 282 built by Baldwin, 1924. Approximately 250,000 pounds.
This type of locomotive earned its nickname Mikado when the Baldwin Locomotive Works built a few 282 locomotives for Japan in 1897. The two-wheel trailing truck allowed a larger firebox and drivers to be used. The steam locomotive is always a fascinating sight for viewers of all ages. Long before the passengers arrive for their ride on the train each day, the engine house crew prepares the locomotive for the day's run.
When we break apart, when something wears out, typically it has to be reverse engineered and manufactured. It's not, there aren't parts warehouses for Baldwin engines. It's important to keep in mind that everything on that is handmade and remanufactured on the property or locally.
The locomotive requires a lot of grease to help in the ongoing preservation of equipment. The fuel oil in the tender is topped off each morning. Water is also added. One of the railroad's diesels is used to pull the yet-to-be-fired steam locomotive under the sand hopper to receive a fresh load of sand for the drivers. Locomotives spray the sand onto the tracks ahead of the drive wheels in order to create traction when a train starts to move. Even the engine house needs constant upkeep to bring it back to its original condition.
The reasoning behind the term skunk railroad was back in 1925, CWR purchased its first rail bus. It was a gas-burning engine, pot-bellied stove for heat. And the people out here in the river said they could smell it coming before they could see it, so they started calling it the skunk train.
The first rail bus, M100, is still in use today, hauling passengers along the beautiful Redwood route. In the late 20s and 30s, the line used several different types and makes of rail buses. Even the modern-looking M300 is still in use today.
I see so much happiness that the trains bring to the youngsters. The children are fascinated by trains, and it really, it's very gratifying to see the youngsters as well as the older folks, and especially the steam engine. They seem to love the steam engine, the old nostalgia. The California Western is more than just a tourist line. We have approximately 15 families that live along the line, and they're very dependent upon the train. We also have a mail service. We provide mail service and newspaper service to approximately 15 families that live out here. Right on that road, okay? Very good. Thank you. You're with the Scout. Okay.
The local Boy Scouts use the railroad to reach their scout camp, Camp No-Yo.
See you guys later.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
Some of the highlights along the line are as we leave Fort Bragg down in the Pudding Creek area, just about 10 minutes away from town, is then osprey nest. There are a lot of wild birds that nest in this area, and if you look up on top of a tree to your left, you'll see an osprey nest. The osprey is commonly known as the fish hawk.
Some youngsters are real rail fans.
Coming up on the right, you'll see a very large and oddly shaped redwood tree. And the foresters think that this tree was struck by lightning years ago, and that's what caused it to grow so irregular.
When we arrive at North Spur, we have to cut the locomotive off, run it around the Y, After we make the move around the Y and connect back up with the train, we back up to the water tower, and the fireman puts in the amount of water that we used up for the trip.
The Y changes the direction the locomotive faces, making the return trip easier for the train crew. While our engine crew tends to their duties, the passengers get a chance to get a cup of coffee or a soft drink, and maybe a snack in the North Spur gift shop and coffee bar.
Defensive end starter.
We entered tunnel number 1, which was completed in 1893. This tunnel is 1,122 feet long. It took 4 years to complete.
The observation car is once again available.
As we climb the mountain, there's one stretch up on the mountain that will take us 8½ miles of track to travel a straight line distance of only 1½ miles. Some of the railroad's 381 curves are as much as 28 degrees. The redwood tree is very unusual. It only grows in a certain area in the world, and a lot of people have not seen the redwood and seen its size and its beauty. You'll notice that we no longer have the redwoods at the summit. The climate is such that it's a little bit too warm in the summer, a little bit too cold in the wintertime, and the redwood trees like moisture and like the coastal fog. There are no redwoods on the east side of the summit.
The beautiful stands of trees and tranquil streams along the railroad remain much the same as when the line opened. Combined with the gentle motion of the train, they make for a very relaxing experience for riders of all ages. The open observation cars must be vacated every time the train enters a tunnel for passenger safety reasons. Here we approach tunnel number 2.
The observation car is once again available. We have just crossed State Highway 20. In about 10 minutes, we will be arriving at Willis. We'll be the first one over.
The town of Willits is the California Western's drop-off point for the lumber shipments of Georgia Pacific Lumber Mill in Fort Bragg. Here, the lumber is transferred to the main line for further distribution. The depot at Willits is constructed entirely of redwood, with a great deal of ornate trimming on the building. While the passengers grab some lunch, the train is turned around and is ready for boarding for our return trip to Fort Bragg. The sound of a steam whistle, the sight of a handsome locomotive, the ever-changing scenery is enough to bring a smile to your face. All too soon, our trip back to yesteryear is over as we return to the Fort Bragg depot. Visitors to the Skunk Train experience a unique combination of railroading history and natural beauty. As a result, the California Western Railroad remains a popular attraction and a vibrant part of this beautiful California community. We hope you have enjoyed this look back in time and will join us again for another adventure on America's historic steam railroads. Welcome to America's historic steam railroads. Many tourist railroads in the United States are well known for their scenic trips through mountain, deserts, forests, or even long seashores. And these trips are spellbinding. Today we're going to visit a railroad that offers one of the greatest scenic wonders as a backdrop, the Grand Canyon. Our adventurous trip starts in northern Arizona, just a few miles west of Flagstaff at the town of Williams on Interstate 40. The trip from Williams to the South Rim is just over 2 hours, and we'll travel through Arizona's pine forests, grassy plains, and small canyons. During our return trip to Williams, we'll need to keep our eyes open for the lawless bandits who are known to hold up the train. I'm Bob Shriver. Come aboard for a trip on the Grand Canyon Railroad on America's historic steam railroads.
The railroad actually began in the late 1800s, and it served the mining industry and the timber industry and the cattle industry. After the railroad served those interests for a number of years, the idea was generated to extend the line all the way to Grand Canyon to provide passenger transportation to Grand Canyon. In 1901, the railway was completed to the canyon, and on September the 17th, 1901, was the first day passengers were transported.
I'm going to do some too, so y'all get ready.
Before our train departs Williams, the passengers are treated to an outstanding Wild West show with music, dancing, and maybe even a friendly little poker game over at the corral.
I guess not. Golly. How many you need, mister?
One.
Just one. Throw one away. You gotta throw one away to get her.
Sorry.
I got a pair of sevens. I'll win this hand. What do you got? I got 2 pairs. This feller wins. He's got 4 queens. What? 4 that queens? That feller, you stay right here. That feller right there won. He ain't got nothing. I got 5 aces. What happened out here, Tex? It was terrible, Marshal. Me and the boys just Arizona had 5 aces. That guy accused him of cheating. Yeah, he insisted, Marshal. That feller caught Davy cheating. Well, I might be a horse thief. And there might be stolen horses, but I didn't do it. Well, if you didn't do it, who did? Let me get out of this guy's way. Well, thanks. I like you anyway. Well, that's all right, folks. They ain't gonna be taking the train today, so let's help them up.
Gregory, pleased to meet you, Gregory. I'm the marshal. What's your name, bud? Eric, and how's your name? Well, Eric, come here and tell me where you come from. You come from the motel. Well, that's good.
I can't hold this smile all day. Hurry it up.
After each show in the corral, the cowboys and the marshal ham it up for the passengers.
We have 4 steam locomotives here at the Grand Canyon Railway. 2 are SC4 consolidations, 18 and 20, and 1 is a SC3 consolidation. It's number 29, and the last steam engine is a 282, number 4960, ex-Burlington route engine.
These engines are really maintenance intensive. We have a crew that comes into the roundhouse at 5 in the morning, starts getting them ready. The road crew picks it up at 8:30. We do our 130 miles, take it back, and another shop crew picks it up, takes it back to service it, and do whatever repairs need to be done before the next day. There are almost always some kind of repairs or adjustments that need to be taken care of overnight. Steam engines were maintenance intensive when they were brand new. And when we start running one that's 80, 85 years old, there's really a lot to watch out for.
Every morning at 9:30 sharp, the train departs Williams with waves from the station employees and cowboys, sending our happy passengers on their way to the south rim of the Grand Canyon.
Between the positions that I carry, fireman, conductor, or dispatcher, I would say conductor is the one I most enjoy because you do get to interact with the people on the train. You're able to spend more time with them. The kids have a great time out here because you're a conductor. You're in costume out here. Even though I'm actually a conductor in real life, I am in a costume, a theme period, and these kids have been watching this stuff on TV, and they get a big kick out of you doing this. And going the other way, the older generation, that's all they used to ride was the trains, so they get a big thrill out of seeing the conductor. I would say conductor is the most interesting, the most eventful, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to enhance the passenger's experience out there.
We got the museum at the Grand Canyon Railway underway at the same time that we began construction on the Grand Canyon Railway in 1989. The museum has a collection, almost all donated from individuals from around the country who have either responded to articles or have come in to ride the train, and they see what they like here and they bring something in or send it in. They're all railroad memorabilia. We've got a lot of material. Right behind me is the track displays. All of this came from the Grand Canyon Railway. And what we have here, this 56-pound rail is what was laid on this line to start with back in 1898 when they started construction here. And it was relay rail brought in from somewhere else on the Santa Fe system. And they set it on out. And this piece was found up at Coconino Canyon, buried up there. And this is a section, damaged section, you can see with the split in the web here, of 90-pound rail. And this is a 131-pound rail, which was what was used out on the Santa Fe line. They're presently using 136-pound on our main line out there. Then there's the material that came from individuals, like watches, railroad watches, all passes of a whole variety that you can deal with. The room that we're in presently was the original Harvey House. Well, the Fray Marcos, where the museum is located, the Fray Marcos Hotel, had, as all Harvey houses, had a dining room and a lunchroom. We're presently in the lunchroom, and the tile floor was what was around the U-shaped counter that was in the middle of this area. When we received this building from the Santa Fe in March of 1989, the building was totally derelict. It is the oldest and largest poured concrete structure in Arizona. And as such, it literally had become a living cave because water had begun to percolate down from the roof. And then we started on rehabilitating the building. And it is on the National Register of Historic Places. We've been very attentive to attending to those details. The color of the building is the original color when the building opened in 1908, and the gray color with the white trim. And the brand new Fray Marcos Hotel, which is open out back, is the same color.
Meanwhile, our locomotive crew has number 18 running north at 40 miles per hour through some of Arizona's pine forests and grassy plains. The 1910 Alco locomotive is running with great ease as we enter the Grand Canyon Park area. We see a Park Service employee returning from down inside the canyon on his mule and pack mule. Shortly after entering the park, the train is at the 1910 original log depot, just steps from the rim.
A number of the passengers that come up can take guided tours, which we do in operation with the Fred Harvey Company, which has been here as long as Santa Fe. About 3 o'clock, they'll start congregating again at the depot and we'll load up for the return trip home. When we arrive at the canyon and all the people get off the train, our work's not over. We've still got to turn the train, which involves taking the entire train around the Y, which goes up by Maswick Lodge and the new depot that the Park Service has built. We park the train again at the depot, cut the engine off, go up again to the end of the Y where we take water. We have to grease the engine. It's done twice a day, once here and once in Williams. We use a big air-powered grease gun for that and use a heavy stick-type grease for the main rods. We'll also fill the tender with water, blow the boiler down so that we can get the impurities out again. We do that several times a day. Then we'll bring the engine back, put it on the train, usually a little after 2 o'clock.
hard to say. They came from the same direction.
No, they weren't. They came out of the canyon.
Oh, no, they...
The Grand Canyon Railway is not only a method of transportation, it's an environmentally sound way to get to the Grand Canyon because it does help keep cars out of the canyon.
We're coming back again.
What we're going to do is switch over to diesel engines because our steamers need to go down and be rebuilt and reconstructed. Plus we're finishing another bigger engine in the shop, and that should be done hopefully in 6 to 8 months.
The technology that we use here to rebuild the steam engines is far more advanced than what was used in the old days, in the old steam shops of the early 1900s and the late 1800s. We have a better welding technology, better machines in our machine shop, and because of those things, we're able to do a better quality job. Here we have the 4960 backhead, actually the backhead of the boiler. You can see here when we replaced the sleeves all around here, inside those sleeves are flexible stay bolts. Everything is stripped off of this backhead at the time, and we just have basically the boiler shell itself. Here is the door hole to the firebox. In the very front of the 4960 firebox, we have the rear flue sheet. You can see the welds with the tubes welded in there, and they are already rolled in. That's all done. That's a brand new rear flue sheet that has been flanged here in this shop and then welded in. We're presently in the pit on number 1 track in the Grand Canyon Railway shop, and 4960 is above us here. We're looking at the running gear. This is the number 2 driver here. This is a brand new axle that we've installed on this wheel. We've also put in new shoes and wedges all the way around. You're looking at the bottom of the boiler, and the frame is holding the boiler. As you can see some of the frame members as we pan back.
Thank goodness the marshal is on the train because he heard that the train robbers might hold up the train today. So he's ready.
Got to memorize? Tell her. I don't
Get your money out there! your money.
This here's a robbery. Give me the money.
Sure she ain't
Where
got
is
it.
it at? Where is it? She got it. You want to get it back? Spend all our money on these tickets. Well, give me your tickets.
This guy should... Lady, I don't work for peanuts. Get out of here.
Take my wife.
Mister, if you don't want her, what would I do with
I've
her?
never seen yellow money before.
Get out of my way there, mister.
Let's go. Give me those guns. Marshal, I didn't do nothing. I didn't do nothing. Let's go. Get moving.
Marshal, I confess to the smell every minute. That guy right there, you saw him, didn't you?
Get moving. Let's go. I told you I'd get him, man. Get moving. Let's go.
What? What's that got to do with anything?
You got down something?
What are you so happy about, lady? You know, you could have a little sympathy or something.
Get moving. Let's go.
He did it.
Wait a minute. You boys turn around and face this girl.
Why?
It's a Kodak moment.
Oh, okay.
Let's go. Get moving. Get those.
Hey, y'all know
Now that the train robbers have been captured, the locomotive crew gets number 18 back up to speed. The passengers settle into their seats to enjoy the ever-changing scenery.
Coming across the crossings and you see these people standing out here, big smiles on their faces, and as fast as they can reaching for their cameras to get a picture of you up there in the cab and waving to you, and you're waving at all the folks. It's a great thrill. It's a lot of fun. With the Grand Canyon as our draw out here, it is nice that we have that natural draw. Well, people have a choice. They can drive their car up here if they want to, or they can take a train, or they can fly into the airport. We want them to take the train because it's fun, it's enjoyable, it is a theme type of railroad. And just like I say, the smiles on their faces want you to keep doing it. You know, it makes you want to be out here with them having fun. And if they're having fun, you're having fun, and that's what you want out of a job.
We again passed the railroad's engine house on our way back to Williams, seeing the line's diesel parked on a siding, getting ready for the winter operation. All too soon, we're back at the Williams Depot, and our trip back in time is over. We hope you have enjoyed your trip today on America's historic steam railroads.
Ready? Shut them down.
Hello, I'm Bob Schreiber. Welcome aboard America's Historic Steam Railroads. Today we're going to take a ride on a fascinating railroad, which is an authentic recreation of a turn-of-the-century mountain logging operation. The Roaring Camp and Big Trees Railroad is located in California, north of Monterey Bay, near the town of Felton. This little railroad has on its roster a 1910 and 1912 Shea locomotive and an 1899 Heisler, which is the oldest operating Heisler locomotive in the world. It also has a fully functional steam sawmill. Sit back now and enjoy your trip up some of the steepest grades, around the tightest curves, and through the gigantic virgin coastal redwoods on America's historic steam railroads.
Roaring Camp is the culmination of one man's attempt to freeze a certain time in American history, and in this case, the logging history of the California West and the opening of the West, which the steam engine played a very dramatic role in. The forest and the logging concept was something that was very interesting to Norman, because he saw, as time passed, how these communities were beginning to disappear as modern technology became more advanced. So his dream was to freeze for the future that particular period of California history and all the elements that were involved in that time period.
The railroad starts its 6-mile round trip from the depot located at Roaring Camp. Soon after departure, we cross the 200-foot-long Indian Creek Bridge. At the switchback, you'll be able to experience the 8 1/2% ruling grade of this little railroad. We continue our climb through virgin redwood, stopping atop Bear Mountain to picnic or to stand in a cathedral grove of big trees. We have climbed over 500 feet up the side of Bear Mountain. As we return to the depot, we see the authentic 1800s sawmill in operation.
I think kids are probably the biggest plus of doing this job. You only have to see their face when you roll back down into the station to pick them up. The big eyes and the wonderment in the face is a financial reward that you can't put a price on. Going up and down the hill, every time that whistle blows, you get that same thing. When you walk up and down the train and talk to them, they're wide-eyed. They're seeing something that some of them didn't know existed. Everybody got a jacket or sweater?
At the present time, Roaring Camp owns 6 locomotives, 3 Shea locomotives, a Heisler locomotive, a Climax locomotive, and a small Baldwin tank engine. At the present time, the middle-sized Shea, the Dixiana here, is operational, as well as our Heisler locomotive.
Logging engines were designed for their great tractive power and flexibility. 2 such locomotives were the Shea and the Heisler. The Heisler uses a pair of inclined cylinders to stroke a crankshaft centered beneath the boiler. 1 axle on each power truck was driven by the crankshaft and gears, and connecting rods passed the motion along to the other axle. The Shea features upright cylinders placed to the right of the boiler. The driving rods turn a crankshaft running the length of the locomotive through universal joints and bevel gears, transmitting power to the wheels of 2 or more swiveling trucks.
Roaring Camp is built very similarly to a logging railroad as it would have been built in the 1890s or even as late as 1910. The railroad follows the geographic contours of the mountain, and as a result the curves on this railroad are incredibly sharp. One curve is as tight as 75 feet radius. This was very common on a logging railroad. Also the grades. This particular railroad has an 8.5% ruling grade, which is unknown to most railroads. Most railroads don't even go near that. On this particular railroad, we do it every day. Some logging railroads went as much as 14 and 15%, which is almost, even I don't like that particular number.
Well, if you notice the type of equipment, rolling stock that we use, it's just a certain size and it's just a certain look, and it works for a certain reason. And this particular steam donkey engine that we have here fits into that category. He put it all together, and we cut the lumber that now houses the little photo shop. It was from the 76 fire, when we had the fire here in Roaring Camp, and Norman went and put the switch back in. The logs from that fire, the trees that we had to take down to put the shoe fly in, he brought down here, and we cut those trees and built the 2 skid sheds that are now here in Roaring Camp.
The historic steam sawmill located near the depot is a fascinating feature for visitors at Roaring Camp. The sawmill uses a small steam engine known as a donkey engine. It operates with the same steam cylinder technology as locomotives to power the huge saw blade as it saws through the massive redwood timbers. Their small size and portability was essential for loggers to mill effectively in remote forests. Steam sawmills like this one at Roaring Camp were once located all along the Pacific Coast forests, and coupled to narrow-gauge steam railroads, provided the efficiency to make turn-of-the-century logging a profitable venture.
This particular type of vehicle was referred to as a speeder. It had a number of uses in logging railroads. It was an inspection engine. It was also used to ferry the work crews and the track gangs up and down the mountains. That way you could reserve your steam power for heavy freight services. And that's very similar to what we do here at Roaring Camp. During our off-season, when we don't have a lot of passengers, we use the Milwaukee. She can carry about 14 people, and we take them up and down on our line on the Milwaukee, and that saves the steam engines for weekend service when we have enough passengers. I'm a road fireman for this particular railroad, and I'm qualified right now to run all of the steam engines that we have here. I'm also a hostler, and it's the responsibility of the hostler to bring the engines up in the morning, to see to it that all of the oil, grease has been applied to whatever needs it, and also to do light maintenance work in the morning. For example, if a packing gland is leaking, then I'd come in the morning, tighten it up, or put some more packing into it. And basically, once the engine's been fired up, I sort of take over as fireman also. And from that point on, I'm charged with the operation of the boiler on the locomotive until we put it to bed at night.
When I'm on the railroad, the things I enjoy the most are the people. You get to see a great cross-section of people here at Roaring Camp, especially little kids who have never seen a real live steam locomotive before in their lives. And they come here to Roaring Camp, we blow the whistle, the steam is pouring out, and you can see their eyes opening up and widening out, and it's just a wonderful feeling to know that you're bringing something to somebody which they would not normally see.
Up on top, just about halfway around the ride, just before you get to the top of Bear Mountain, we have an area called Cathedral Grove. Beautiful, beautiful ring of trees. The average age of the redwoods is about 600 to 700 years old. They're about 250 feet in height. Cathedral Grove is a beautiful spot. You have to see it to really appreciate it.
The switchback section of Roaring Camp and Big Trees Railroad, called Hallelujah Junction, is the ideal place to sand out the locomotives. The 8 1/2% grade has the locomotives working hard at this point. Sanding out the locomotive is done when the fireman empties a small can of sand into the firebox. The sand being sucked up through the heat tubes cleans the soot from the tubes, allowing the tubes to conduct heat better. And as the train backs up Hallelujah Junction, the black sooty sand falls away from the passengers.
You can go to a museum and see these pieces of equipment sitting on static display. And on static display, you don't see what they were doing. You don't feel what they were doing. You don't hear it. You don't get the real true sense of what the railroading was like, what it was. Here at Roaring Camp you can, because the machines are alive, they are operating, they're doing what they were doing in the old days. And here you can see it. It's one of the few places in the United States where you can see a logging engine doing what a logging engine does best. That's go around sharp curves, go up steep grades, and carry heavy tonnage up those grades.
There is a majesty of a steam engine in the woods when the Tule fog is coming up, rising. the rain drops dropping from the forest. And the steam engine is just going, you know, and the steam is coming up. It's majestic. It's majestic, you know. You just go, wow, you know. And those moments, you can't touch it. It's priceless.
We hope you've enjoyed this visit to the Roaring Camp and Big Trees Railroad. Thousands of visitors visit this wonderful operation every year, and any trip to the Monterey Bay Area wouldn't be complete without stopping for a ride. The Roaring Camp and Big Trees Railroad is truly an exciting member of America's historic steam railroads. Hello, I'm Bob Schreiber. Welcome aboard America's Historic Steam Railroads. Our trip today is on the highest and longest narrow gauge steam railroad in the United States, the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. It is 64 miles in length and climbs to an elevation of just over 10,000 feet. This scenic railroad is located in the Rocky Mountain states of Colorado and New Mexico, and operates along their common state border. During its journeys between Antonito, Colorado and Chama, New Mexico, the train crosses the state border 11 times. going through open desert country with its sagebrush, through deep and spectacular Toltec Gorge, through tunnels, and over high mountain passes with its tall pine trees and vast aspen groves. During the last 70 years, the railroad has remained the same. It operates today with the same buildings, water tanks, and of course, its mighty steam locomotives. A true historical setting. So now, sit back and enjoy your trip on America's historic steam railroad.
All aboard.
This property is very unique in that we have one of the few railroads in the country that utilizes the original equipment, the original rolling stock, all the original structures, all part of the property here, that it's all still intact. There's very little different with the railroad now than it was 50 years ago. So the passengers really do step back in time when they ride on the railroad here.
Just beyond the maintenance shop here off the right, you'll find the sand house and coal tipple. The coal tipple is one of the oldest standing structures still left in the yard area. This coal tipple is still in operation. A little beyond the coal tipple, you'll find the water tank. This water tank holds 50,000 gallons of water and is capable of servicing 2 locomotives at the same time. Off the left, you'll find some rolling stock that was left here by the Denver and Rio Grande Western when they were running through here. Just up ahead, we'll be going over the first trestle of the day over the Chalma River. Now on the way up all the way into Osier, we'll be going through some mountainous area. You'll see the sagebrush that you see now, quaky aspen, blue spruce, ponderosa pine, and some Douglas fir trees on the way up there. Some of you may be wondering about the wildlife. If you keep your eyes open, you might get to spot an elk, maybe some deer, maybe an occasional bear. Some of you may have noticed that we are using 2 locomotives this morning. This is known as a double header operation. Now just up ahead, we'll be going over a trestle. We do have weight restrictions on this trestle. So the process that'll be going on here is the lead engine, which is known as the helper engine, will be cut off the train That one will go over the trestle on its own. The second locomotive, known as the road engine, will then pull the rest of the train across the trestle. We'll stop on the other side, hook back up, and continue on our way. This is known as Lobato Trestle. It sits at 100 feet high and is 340 feet long. It extends over the Little Wolf Creek, which pours into the Chama River. If you're taking photos, you can get some good shots off the left-hand side of the train. The locomotives that are being used this morning to pull a train up to Cumbres Pass are classified as K36 series locomotives. Both locomotives were built back in 1925 by the Baldwin Locomotive Company out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
This locomotive was built in 1925 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it was built for the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad and spent its almost entire life operating on this line. It is a 282 wheel arrangement, which means it has 2 pilot truck wheels, 8 drive wheels, and a 2-wheel trailing truck underneath the cab. It weighs about 93 tons in working order, plus the tender, which adds another 50 tons to make a 143-ton locomotive in all. The locomotive carries 9.5 tons of coal and 5,000 gallons of water in it, and you use about 4 tons a day when you're out on the road, and probably boil away close to another 5,000 gallons of water a day. When the trains are longer than 8 or 9 cars, we put a second locomotive on the train out of Chama to help it up the steep grade from Chama to the summit of Cumbres Pass. The locomotives are rated to pull a load of 235 tons up the 4% grade out of Chama to the summit of Cumbres Pass. And today's train was a little bit heavier than that, which required the use of a second locomotive to the top of the hill.
Now just up ahead, we will be reaching the highest point along the line. This will be at Cumbres Pass Station. We will be sitting at 10,015 feet above sea level. We will be stopping up ahead at Cumbres Pass to take water on the locomotive. This is only a temporary stop. Off the right, you'll find one of the better preserved buildings. This will be the depot here at Cumbres Pass. Once we get rolling and off the left, before the highway, you'll find the turnaround Y and snow shed. Snow sheds covered most of this area back in the early days of the Denver and Rio Grande Western, when they were running all year round.
As I mentioned earlier, this locomotive is a 282 wheel arrangement, and that means it's got 2 pilot truck wheels that help guide it into curves up front, followed by 8 drive wheels, which provide all of the tractive force, or the actual force to move the locomotive down the track, followed by another pair of trailing truck wheels that support the weight of the firebox in the back end of the locomotive. Now, these locomotives are very unique in that they are built with the frames that support the weight of the engine outside the drive wheels. On most locomotives, the drive wheels, which you can see hiding way back in here, are on the outside of the frame of the engine. Now, on these engines, the drive wheels are on the inside, and they have a crank and a counterweight on the outside. The reason that they built the locomotives this way is by moving the frames further apart, they could lower the boiler down between the frame and make the engine with a much lower center of gravity and much more stable on the narrow gauge track. The counterbalances on the outside here are put on there to counterweight the weight of the main rods and the side rods on the locomotive. As all of this is moving round and round, you can imagine you get a lot of force of this stuff going up and down and back and forth, so you have to counterbalance the weight of all of the running gear assembly. The engineer's controls are right in this area here. There's basically only 4 or 5 things that the engineer works with at any one time. This lever right here is the throttle, which opens a valve up in the boiler that puts steam to the cylinders and makes the locomotive move. This long lever right here is the forward and reverse lever. With the lever forward, the engine will go in a forward direction, and with the lever in the back position, the engine goes backwards. It also controls the amount of steam that is emitted to the cylinders of the locomotive for the length of the stroke. With the normally you try to run the lever as close to the center as you can to use as little steam and coal as possible. This lever here is for the brakes on the locomotive. It controls the brakes on the engine and the tender only. This large lever here controls the brakes on the train as well as those on the locomotive. When you're running the engine on the train, you use this handle pretty much exclusively. When you run the locomotive by itself, you use the smaller one here. And the needle that's at 45 shows us how much air pressure is in the brake cylinders of the locomotive. If that gauge was down at 0, the brakes on the engine would be released. At 45, they're fully pumped up. The gauge that shows 90 shows us the amount of air pressure in the brake line that runs through due to the cars on the train. This little thing right here is the water glass. There are two of them on the locomotive, one here as well as one over here. And these show you the level of the water in the boiler of the engine. Right now it's full up to the very top. Water is a very, very important element on a steam locomotive. If you don't have enough water, you can blow yourself to smithereens. So you want to make sure that the water level is always in the proper spot for any particular place upon the railroad. This is the firebox door. Inside here is where the fire that creates the heat to make the steam is located. The temperatures in here when the locomotive is pulling hard can get up close to 2,000 degrees, obviously hot enough to melt the steel in it, which is why you have to have the water level over the top of the roof of the firebox. Otherwise it'll melt the roof of the firebox out and the engine can explode. It's also operated by a foot pedal.
Up ahead now is the highest trestle along the line. This is known as the Cascade Creek Trestle. This trestle sits at 137 feet high and is 409 feet long. It extends over the Little Cascade Creek.
We operate 2 trains a day. One train leaves from Antonito, Colorado, which is the opposite terminal of the railroad. The other train leaves Chama. The Antonito train leaves at 10 o'clock in the morning. The Chama train leaves at 10:30. Both trains travel to Osier, which is the midpoint of the railroad. We have a large dining hall that we built to feed the passengers. We also have a picnic area there for those passengers who want to bring their own picnic lunch with them. Trains are there for about an hour, and after lunch, the trains go back the way they came. The Chama train gets back at 4:30 in the afternoon. The Antonito train gets back in at 5.
The railroad offers a self-guided walking tour of the yards of the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad by picking up a map in the ticket office at the stations of Atenito or Chama. In Chama, for example, you can see the original 1880s log cabin that was used by train crews when they had to stay overnight in Chama. The 1889 original depot. The Y at the south end of the yards, where the locomotive is turned around after each day's trip. The 50,000-gallon water tank with its unique double water spouts, allowing 2 locomotives to receive water at the same time. The original coal tipple that still operates today, but only on special occasions. In Atenito, you can see a fine example of a loop track that narrow-gauge railroads use to turn their locomotives around without the extensive use of switches.
This is a wooden elevator-operated coal tipple. Holds about 120 tons of coal. It was built in 1924 to replace an earlier coal trestle that the railroad had. The reason they changed from a coal trestle to a coal tipple is it required much less in the way of grade here to push the cars up, which made it a safer operation. The railroad got its coal in drop-bottom gondola cars and dumped them in what we call the grizzly pits, 2 concrete-lined pits. The pits together will hold about 60 tons of coal. So the coal would be dumped in these pits, and then a 2-bucket elevator, which you can see behind me here, 1 bucket up, 1 bucket down, were raised and lowered. When the bucket was dropped to the bottom of the pit, a guillotine-type door was opened, coal fell by gravity into the bucket. They operated the engine to raise that bucket to the top, which brought the other bucket down. As the bucket hit the top of its track, it tipped over and dumped coal into this pocket up here. And although we don't use it on a daily basis, we do like to keep it full of coal and ready to use in case of emergency or terribly wet weather, so we keep a supply of clean, dry coal that we can get to easily. But this is our sand house. The locomotives require sand to provide traction in wet or slippery conditions. In the old days, railroads would get what we call green sand that is not graded and is not dry, and then by use of a sand house like this would prepare locomotive sand. Sand was then brought into the building and shoveled up into this hopper around a coal-burning stove. A fairly hot fire was kept here in the stove, essentially continuously, and slowly the sand had the moisture driven from it by the heat. As the sand got dry, it would, of its own weight, sift through the holes in the screen and collect on the floor around the stove. It was then the job of the sand house crew to shovel that sand through a screen over here to get the impurities out and get the large pieces out so that it would be of uniform size. So then behind this wall we have a supply of clean, dry, free-flowing sand. Behind me is the remaining 2 stalls of a 9-stall brick roundhouse built by the railroad in 1899. When the Rio Grande first got here in 1881, they immediately put up a 9-stall wooden roundhouse and machine shop because this was a helper station for Cumbres Pass. In 1899, as happened to most wooden roundhouses, it caught fire and burned to the ground. Because this railroad at that time was the only reasonable means of transportation in the countryside, as soon as the fire was out and the ashes cooled down, they came in and built the brick roundhouse, of which these are the remaining 2 stalls. Behind it, sort of out of sight, is the machine shop, and behind it on this side is our new engine house, 2-stall engine house that we built in 1980. This is rotary OY. It was built in 1923 by the American Locomotive Works for the Rio Grande Railroad and was used here on Cumbres Pass. We now use it, it seems, about every other year to clear the railroad. May in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado finds our railroad buried by anywhere from 12 to 20 feet of snow. So we frequently find it necessary in order to open the line, which is laying closed all winter, to run a rotary snowplow. This machine was built in 1923. It consists of a standard locomotive boiler and a standard two-cylinder locomotive engine. The rotary itself only provides power to turn this large wheel. The rotary is then pushed up against the snow by anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 locomotives, depending upon the conditions.
The Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad has grown over the last few years into an outstanding example of why people want to preserve our rich heritage. As former Colorado State Senator Hugh Fowler stated at the recent dedication of rebuilt locomotive number 463,
in a way, 463 embodies the whole idea of how difficult it is to preserve the things that made our country strong, the things that Americans think are important. We think this is important, and you kids that are here, someday you'll see how important it is.
the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad is at the forefront when it comes to preserving our past. A trip to southern Colorado or northern New Mexico to experience this excellent railroad is a must for every rail fan or history buff, young or old. Come enjoy one of America's historic steam railroads.